The case of the missing Finn. As day dragged into night and the pirates trickled back into Finn's apartment, the usual chaos of their return unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Sullivan was first, humming a newly acquired shanty as he strolled in, tossing his coat onto the nearest chair. Red followed, unbuckling his security belt and dropping it onto the couch with the satisfaction of a warrior shedding battle armor. Blackwood, ever the captain, took to pacing the living room, his hands clasped behind his back as though inspecting the deck of a ship after a long voyage. Garrick arrived last, dramatically flipping his coat over a chair with the practiced flourish of a stage actor taking his final bow. "Another day, another triumph," he declared. "Ladies and gentlemen," he paused mid-sentence, frowning. His gaze swept the room. "Wait, where's Finn?" That was when they all finally noticed. The apartment, still an unholy disaster of misplaced relics, abandoned takeout boxes, and one deeply traumatized Roomba that Red had bested in combat weeks ago, was missing something crucial. The usual background presence of their ever-suffering landlord was conspicuously absent. Sullivan scratched his beard. "Come to think of it, I didn't see him this morning neither." "Aye," Blackwood added, narrowing his eyes. "And now that I think on it, I don't recall him giving his usual, 'If you burn down my apartment, I will have you all evicted and possibly arrested' speech before we left." A heavy silence settled over them. Red peered toward the kitchen, frowning. "His strange drink machine be untouched," he noted, pointing at the coffee maker. "That be unnatural." Garrick clicked his tongue. "Aye, and his boots aren't by the door. He never leaves without those, lest he suffer the horrors of what he calls the unholy stickiness of the hallway floor." Blackwood's pacing slowed. "All right, this be suspicious. Have any of you seen him since last night?" They exchanged glances, more silence. "Maybe he got tired of us and left," Red offered. Garrick scoffed. "Absurd. He's been on the edge of madness for weeks, yet he persisted." Sullivan nodded. "Aye, that lad was built to suffer. He wouldn't abandon his post." The room fell into thoughtful murmurs as each pirate began poking around for clues, though their investigative methods left much to be desired. Red checked under the couch. "Not here." Sullivan opened the fridge. "Not here, neither." Blackwood lifted a houseplant, squinted at it, then set it back down. "Nay, not under this shrub." Garrick rubbed his temples. "Gentlemen, we must apply logic. Finn is missing. His belongings remain, yet he is nowhere to be found. The last we saw him was—" He paused, trying to recall. "What was he doing before we left yesterday?" Red snapped his fingers, muttering about something. Seemed annoyed. Sullivan smirked. "Aye, but that's like saying the ocean be wet. That lad mutters more than a storm rolls thunder." They all nodded, an irrefutable fact. Blackwood, however, was no longer amused. His posture straightened, his expression sharpening with something close to genuine concern. "Then we may have a mystery on our hands." Garrick crossed his arms. "Do we want a mystery? Do we have a choice?" More silence. Then, reluctantly, they all sighed in agreement. Sullivan cracked his knuckles. "Right then. Time to find the lad before he winds up dead in a ditch or worse." Red tilted his head. "What be worse than death?" Blackwood exhaled. "Paperwork." A collective shudder passed through them. And with that grim declaration, the hunt for Finn began. Searching the streets. The crew stepped out into the glow of Miami's streets, where the scent of grilled food clashed with exhaust fumes, and the distant bass of club music pulsed through the air. Though they had spent a month adapting to this strange world, it remained a puzzle, one they solved daily with wildly mixed results. Sullivan adjusted his coat, squinting at the passing headlights. "Right, if Finn's gone missing, we ought to check the places he be frequenting." "Aye," Blackwood agreed, "his usual haunts." "His what?" Red frowned. Places he lingers, you clod. Red shrugged. Then just say that. Their first stop was a lively street corner where street performers entertained clusters of tourists. Fire breathers, musicians, and breakdancers competed for attention, but it was a wiry man in a checkered vest, twisting balloons into elaborate creatures who caught Garrick's eye. "Oi, balloon man," Garrick called, striding forward. "You seen a lad? About your tall, sharp wit, patience wearing thinner by the day?" The balloon man paused mid-twist, his fingers frozen around what looked like an octopus. "Buddy, you just described half my co-workers." Blackwood stepped up, voice low and commanding. "The lad's a juggler, perpetually weary of our existence." Recognition flickered in the man's eyes. "Oh, that guy. Yeah, he's good. Stole my crowd last time he was here." He finished his octopus with an unnecessarily aggressive squeeze. "Haven't seen him today, though." Sullivan exhaled. Onward, then. Their next stop was a bustling cafe where a guitarist strummed a dramatic tune, his case open for donations. Garrick, ever direct, clapped a hand on the musician's shoulder mid-verse. "Apologies, Bard, but have you seen a juggler around these parts?" The guitarist faltered, blinking. "A what?" "Ye know." Red mimed, tossing invisible balls. "Throws things, catches 'em. Does it again." "Oh, yeah, plenty of those guys around." Sullivan sighed. "Aye, but we're looking for one in particular." "Hair like a dark tide," Blackwood cut in. "Sharp tongue, looks like he's regretting every choice that led him here." The musician snapped his fingers. "Oh, him! Yeah, he's good. Haven't seen him today, though." Another dead end. "Blast it all," Garrick muttered as they moved on. "We're searching for a man who vanishes into thin air." As they crossed a busy street, a bike messenger came barreling toward them at full speed. "Move, you lunatics!" The pirates barely leapt aside before the cyclist shot past, disappearing into traffic. Red dusted himself off. "I liked him." Sullivan scowled. "You liked him?" "He had spirit." Blackwood groaned. "Can we focus?" Their third stop was a small plaza where a man in a red suit balanced a folding chair on his chin, his audience clapping in delight. The pirates watched, waiting for him to finish, none particularly eager to interrupt someone with a piece of furniture on their face. When he finally set the chair down, Blackwood stepped forward. "A moment, if you please. We're seeking a juggler by the name Finn." The performer wiped his forehead. "Oh, yeah, I know Finn. Didn't see him today, though." Garrick was about to curse their luck when a voice behind them chimed in. "Wait, Finn? Blonde guy? Kinda grumpy?" The crew turned to see a woman on a nearby bench, sipping from a smoothie. She had been watching the street show, but now she was far more interested in them. Sullivan perked up. "Aye, that's the one." She nodded. "Yeah, he was here earlier. He was juggling. Looked kinda distracted, though. Then his phone rang. He picked up, got real serious, and took off toward the beach." The pirates exchanged looks. "The beach?" Blackwood repeated. "Yep." Red cracked his knuckles. "Well, we best be getting there then." But before they could move, the scent of sizzling meat caught Garrick's attention. He turned, spotting a hot dog vendor flipping sausages on a tiny grill. "We march on an empty stomach?" Garrick asked. "Unwise." Sullivan groaned, but pulled out his wallet. They had learned, through trial and mostly error, that money was the key to surviving this world. As they ordered, the vendor gave them an odd look. "You guys tourists or something?" Garrick smirked. "You could say that." "You here for that pirate festival this weekend?" The crew hesitated. "Aye," Blackwood answered slowly. "That be exactly why we're here." The vendor nodded in approval. "Figured. You guys really commit to the bit." Hot dogs in hand, the pirates continued toward the beach. They had a mystery to solve. A party in pieces. The salty night air greeted the pirates as they trudged onto the beach, boots sinking into the cool sand. They had expected an empty shore, maybe a set of footprints leading toward some grand mystery. Instead, they were met with chaos. Tables stood at precarious angles, some half collapsed, as if their legs had simply given up. A long folding table sagged dangerously under the weight of assorted snacks, some still in their grocery bags. Overhead, a banner, barely clinging to existence, read in bold, uneven letters, "Congratulations, Garrick. Silence." "What?" Sullivan began slowly. "In the name of Neptune's brittle beard, is this—" Blackwood folded his arms, scanning the wreckage. "Looks like a party." "A poorly constructed one," Garrick noted, rubbing his chin. "Whoever planned it has the organizational skills of a concussed bilge rat." Red pointed toward a makeshift stage where a band was tuning their instruments. Standing among them, deep in conversation with the lead singer, was Finn. Sullivan exhaled. "Found him." They approached, boots crunching in sand, but Finn was too engrossed in his debate to notice. The lead singer, an older man with a thick grey beard and sunglasses, despite the fact it was night, listened intently as Finn gestured toward the stage. "I'm just saying," Finn insisted, "if you open with an 8-minute experimental jazz number, you'll lose them immediately." The bearded musician scoffed. "It's not just jazz, it's jazz fusion." "Right. Well, fusion or not, this is a party, not a space voyage. People want to hear music that won't make them question their existence." The musician grumbled but didn't argue further. It was then that Finn finally noticed the crew standing there, watching him expectantly. His expression immediately darkened. "Oh, come on." He dragged a hand down his face. "You guys ruined the surprise." The pirates exchanged glances. "Surprise?" Blackwood asked. Finn sighed and motioned vaguely around them. "The party. I put this together for Garrick, for his movie." He turned to Garrick. "You know, the whole congratulations on being in a major motion picture thing." Garrick blinked, then smirked. "Aye, well, that'd be rather thoughtful of ye." Finn waved him off. "Don't get all mushy on me. It was supposed to be tomorrow night, after your final shoot. But no, you all had to go full detective mode just because I stepped out for a few hours." Red tilted his head. "So, the reason this looks like it was thrown together by a drunken sea turtle is because it's not done yet," Finn interrupted, rubbing his temples. "I was still setting up when I got a call about a permit issue, so I had to come down here and deal with it." He gestured at the mess. "The tables aren't set, the food's not out, half the decorations are still in boxes, and I was in the middle of convincing this guy not to start with jazz fusion." He shot a glare toward the musician, who raised his hands in surrender. Sullivan crossed his arms. "So we worried for nothing." Finn let out an exasperated laugh. "Clearly. I mean, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but what did you guys think happened? That I was kidnapped?" There was a beat of silence. Garrick shrugged. "Aye." Finn huffed a laugh, shaking his head. "You do realize I've survived in this city for years without you lot breathing down my neck, right?" Red frowned. "That don't sound correct." Blackwood cleared his throat. "Well then, since we be early, should we help finish setting this—" He hesitated, glancing at the precarious tables and scattered supplies. "Celebration?" Finn looked at them, then at the tables, then back at them. "No, absolutely not." He shook his head. "I've seen how you people handle furniture." Sullivan huffed. "One broken table and we're branded for life." Finn ignored him, glancing at his watch. "We're heading back. I still need to sort this out, but I don't need you guys hovering like overprotective parents." Garrick smirked. "If you say so, lad." "I do say so." Finn turned toward the road. "Come on, the bus should be here soon." They followed him to the bus stop, where a few locals were already waiting. One man in a Hawaiian shirt eyed them, nodding approvingly. "Pirate Festival?" Blackwood, not missing a beat, nodded. "Aye." The man grinned. "Nice. Love the commitment." The bus pulled up, and they climbed aboard, squeezing into seats as the vehicle rumbled forward. Finn leaned back with a long, exhausted exhale. Next time I disappear for a few hours, please don't assume I've been abducted." Sullivan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "No promises." Finn groaned as the bus carried them home. Red's dawn patrol. The first glimmers of dawn crept across the sky, casting a faint blue hue over the city as Red prepared for his shift at the mall. Dressed in uniform, a crisp blue shirt, black tactical-style pants, and a belt laden with a radio, flashlight, and an impressive assortment of jingling keys, he stood in front of the bathroom mirror, regarding himself with solemn intensity. "Aye," he muttered, adjusting his name badge. "Today, law and order be in my hands." From the living room came a groggy, muffled groan. "Red, for the love of all things holy, stop talking to yourself." Red ignored Sullivan's complaint, straightening his stance. With a final nod at his reflection, he turned on his heel and strode out the door, boots clunking with the weight of righteous duty. The bus ride to the mall was largely uneventful, save for the elderly woman who sat beside him and sniffed the air disapprovingly. She turned to him, narrowing her eyes. "Why do you smell like salt water and the essence of 1,000 bad decisions?" Red merely nodded, as if she had spoken wisdom beyond her years. "That be experience, ma'am." She patted his arm sympathetically. The mall, still half asleep, greeted him with the low hum of maintenance work. Vacuum cleaners droned in distant corridors. The air smelled of floor polish, and the occasional metal gate rattled open as store employees prepared for the day. Red strode into the security office, where his supervisor, Frank DeLuca, a man who looked like he'd made peace with the futility of his job years ago, was hunched over his coffee. He barely glanced up. "Morning, Red." Red saluted. "Frank." Frank sighed. "We've talked about this." Red lowered his hand, but his stance remained as rigid as ever. Frank exhaled and pinched the bridge of his nose. "All right, morning brief. Food court deliveries are running late, so don't let the pretzel guy harass the truck driver again. Lost and Found is overflowing with abandoned sippy cups. And..." He took a slow sip of coffee. "We got another report of the goose on the premises." Red's expression darkened. "The beast returns." Frank sipped again. "Try not to make a scene this time. No promises." With that, Red grabbed his radio and set off on patrol, his boots echoing with righteous purpose through the still quiet corridors of the mall. The standoff. The first half hour passed without incident. Red walked his assigned route with practiced vigilance, nodding solemnly to janitors, scrutinizing store windows as if expecting a sudden heist, and pausing only to frown at a mannequin that looked a little too self-aware. Then, just as he reached the food court, he heard it. A deep guttural honk. Red froze. His hand went to his radio. "Frank." A crackle of static, then a weary, "What?" "The goose is here." Silence, then, Just leave it alone, Red. We already called animal control." Red's jaw tightened. He turned his head slowly. There, perched atop an overturned mop bucket like a king surveying his domain, was the goose. It locked eyes with him. Red took a measured step forward. The goose honked, a low, menacing sound that echoed through the food court like the first ominous note of an unfinished symphony. Red's grip tightened on his belt. A standoff, a battle of wills, man versus beast. Then, just as tension reached its peak, a janitor walked by, gave a casual wave to the goose, and the infernal creature hopped down and waddled away, entirely uninterested in Red's existence. Red stood motionless. A breeze from the air vents ruffled his uniform. "Aye," he muttered, adjusting his belt. "I let you live this day. The studio lot, a realm of controlled madness. Ah." An hour after Red had departed to wage his eternal war against mall-bound chaos, Garrick emerged from his room, stretching with the satisfaction of a man who had thoroughly conquered the art sleeping in. The apartment was quiet, save for the occasional murmur from Sullivan, who was muttering something about "sellin' me soul to sing about waves" in his sleep. Blackwood remained a snoring lump, beneath a pile of blankets, and Finn was, predictably, nowhere to be seen. The lingering scent of coffee suggested that someone, at some point, had been awake long enough to make it, before abandoning all further responsibility. Garrick helped himself to what remained, downing the lukewarm dregs straight from the pot before tossing on his coat and stepping out into the Miami morning. The city greeted him with its usual brand of barely contained chaos. Honking horns, shouting pedestrians, and the ever-present aroma of something both fried and highly questionable. His boots struck the pavement with purpose as he made his way toward the studio lot, his new kingdom of flashing lights and make-believe. By the time he arrived, the production was already in full swing. Assistants buzzed around like overworked bees, camera crews fine-tuned their setups, and actors in various states of costume loitered between takes, sipping coffee and scrolling their phones like marooned sailors clinging to the last scraps of civilization. Garrick strode through it all like he belonged, because in his mind, he did. He tossed a wave to the makeup artist, who had long since given up trying to tame his unruly hair, nodded to the costume director, who had wisely chosen to lean into his existing wardrobe rather than fight it, and instinctively ducked just in time to avoid a frazzled intern sprinting past with an armful of prop swords. "Ah, you live to see another morning," Garrick mused, falling into step beside the film's director Chapman, a man who could best be described as equal parts genius and barely contained madness. Chapman grinned around the cigarette perpetually perched at the corner of his mouth. "And you, my dear rogue, have arrived just in time for your moment of glory." Garrick smirked. "I? Another scene where I'm to threaten some poor fool within an inch of his life? Even better." Chapman clapped his hands, eyes gleaming with excitement. "Today, you die." A pause. Garrick arched a brow. "Do I now?" "Oh yes, and spectacularly," Chapman declared, ushering him toward the set. "You see, you and the lead have been at odds this whole time. Opposing forces of the sea, fate-bound to this climactic duel." He gestured dramatically to the intricately constructed ship deck, complete with billowing sails and a painted sky backdrop. "And now, you fall, a tragic end, but one they'll talk about for generations." Garrick folded his arms, unimpressed. "You mean I lose?" Chapman sighed, patting his shoulder like a man trying to console an unruly child. "You advance the narrative, my friend. The villain must fall, else the hero never rise." Garrick considered this. That'd be debatable." Chapman ignored him, motioning for an assistant to fetch the stunt team. The stunt rehearsal, or lack thereof. Minutes later, Garrick stood at the edge of the set, peering down at the thick crash mat below. His arms remained stubbornly crossed. "You're telling me men throw themselves willingly upon this thing?" he asked, skepticism thick in his voice. The stunt coordinator, Maria, a grizzled woman who had survived years in the industry by developing a near-supernatural tolerance for nonsense, smirked. "You're telling me you've survived all these years as a pirate without taking a fall?" Garrick narrowed his eyes. "I don't fall, lass. I descend with purpose." Maria patted the crash mat. "Great. Then descend over there when we call action." The scene began. Garrick faced off against the film's young hero, a fresh-faced actor named Jeremy, who had spent weeks perfecting his swordplay and still handled his blade like he was expecting it to bite back. Steel clashed. Garrick drove him back, letting the fight carry across the deck, giving the cameras every angle they needed. He sneered, growled his lines, let his coat billow dramatically as the tide of battle turned, until, at last, Jeremy landed the scripted blow. A gasp rippled through the watching crew. Garrick clutched his chest, staggering backward, eyes wide with the realization that his character had been bested. The moment arrived. The fall. Garrick inhaled sharply and launched himself over the railing with the full, reckless flourish of a man who had decided this was his magnum opus. Gasps turned into shouts as he twisted mid-air, fully committing to the theatrics of his demise, only to realize, a second too late, that he had overshot the crash mat entirely. The landing was not soft. A pause. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the tangled wreckage of his own limbs, Garrick weakly lifted a thumbs up. Chapman clapped. Beautiful. Keep rolling. Blackwood wanders in wonder. Blackwood had taken to wandering. With the sea now a distant memory and no deck beneath his feet, the streets of Miami had become his new domain, his own personal uncharted horizon. Every morning before his shift at the museum, he set out with no particular plan, no real course, just the simple pleasure of the unknown stretching before him. And by the gods, did this city have oddities aplenty. This morning he found himself standing before a peculiar establishment wedged between a laundromat and a suspiciously windowless bar. A flickering neon sign read, "Mike's Exotic Creatures Pest Removal." A battered placard in the window boasted an offer that gave Blackwood pause. Buy one snake, get a free scorpion. He scratched his chin. That seemed excessive. Curiosity won out. He stepped inside. The air carried a potent mixture of sawdust, reptile musk, and something vaguely tropical. Cages and glass tanks lined the walls, each housing some manner of beady-eyed creature that regarded him with mild suspicion. Behind the counter stood a squat man with a graying mullet and a tattoo of what appeared to be an extremely irate raccoon on his forearm. He glanced up lazily. Need an exterminator or a pet? Blackwood folded his arms. What be the difference? Mike, or so Blackwood assumed, grinned. Intent. Blackwood let out a hearty laugh. Aye, I like ye already. Mike jerked a thumb toward a terrarium where a small, wrinkled beast lurked under a rock. That there's a vinegaroon. Good for keeping roaches out of your place. Blackwood frowned. And what, pray tell, is a vinegaroon? Mike smirked. Like a scorpion, but no sting. Sprays acid instead. Blackwood's brows lifted in appreciation. A creature armed with acidic defenses? Tell me, sir, are they loyal? Mike considered this. They mind their business. Blackwood respected that. With a promise to return if he ever found himself in need of an acid-spraying companion, he stepped back into the chaotic rhythm of the Miami morning. His next discovery was a place that practically called to him, the Emporium of Wondrous Goods. The dimly lit shop overflowed with trinkets, artifacts, and the distinct air of overpriced mystery. The owner, a bespectacled man named Edgar, wore a suit that had last been fashionable 2 decades ago, and carried himself with the unmistakable aura of a man who had absolutely attempted to summon something from beyond the veil, at least once. Ah, a man of discerning taste, Edgar greeted, adjusting his glasses as Blackwood examined a tarnished brass sextant. Blackwood turned the device over in his hands. This be an actual tool of navigation, aye? Edgar nodded sagely. Indeed, a genuine maritime artifact, once used by sailors to chart their course upon the open sea. Blackwood squinted at the price tag. $70? A small price for history, Edgar said smoothly. Blackwood grinned. Friend, I am history, and I can tell you right now, this was pilfered from an old man's attic. Edgar sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. $40. Blackwood set the sextant down. Tempting, but I be navigating by the stars or not at all. Edgar gave a knowing smile. A lost art. Aye, Blackwood mused. Which is why I plan to teach it at the museum, once I get me hands on proper materials. Edgar perked up. A teacher of old-world navigation. Now that is something Miami has been sorely lacking. Blackwood couldn't tell if the man was being sarcastic or genuinely intrigued. Either way, he approved. Blackwood's final discovery of the morning stopped him in his tracks. Fitzwilliam's Gentleman's Hat Boutique. The sign was elegant, the window display exquisite, top hats, fedoras, flat caps, even a tricorn proudly perched upon a velvet stand. Blackwood stepped inside. A thin man, with an impeccable moustache, and a posture so rigid it looked physically painful, turned to him with a practiced smile. "Welcome, sir. You have the look of a man who understands the power of a fine hat." Blackwood smirked. "I have the look of a man who has commanded others by the mere tilt of one." The shopkeeper's expression brightened, as if he had just met a long-lost brother. "Then we must find you something befitting." For the next 20 minutes, Blackwood indulged in a ritual as sacred as any battle preparation, trying on hats. A well-crafted hat was no mere accessory. It was a statement, a declaration of authority before a single word was spoken. Finally, he found it. A deep navy tricorn, its edges crisply lined, its shape perfect in every way. He set it upon his head, adjusting it just so. The shopkeeper beamed. Magnificent. Blackwood glanced at his reflection, tipping the brim slightly forward. "I know." He stepped back into the sun, his new hat perched atop his head, a renewed sense of purpose in his stride. By the time noon rolled around, he had filled his morning with knowledge of exotic beasts, forgotten relics, and the fine art of hat appreciation. Not bad for a man displaced in time. Not bad at all. Sullivan's callback. The infernal ringing contraption, Finn called a phone, sat before Sullivan on the table, a beast of metal and glass that, despite its small size, commanded his fate more than any man or king ever had. He scowled at it. Last night, after much internal cursing, he had finally followed Finn's instructions on how to use the cursed thing to summon Clive, the music producer who had approached him at the bar. Sullivan had introduced himself as the man with the voice of the sea, and Clive had, miraculously, not hung up. Instead, he'd promised to call back in the morning with details. And so, Sullivan sat, arms crossed, glaring at the phone like it might sprout legs and flee the room. Then it rang. The sudden shrill brrring sent a jolt up his spine. He seized the device, pressed the green button Finn had pointed out, and held it to his ear like a war horn before battle. "Sullivan," he announced. A pause. Then, yes, good morning, sir. I'm calling about an exclusive offer for high-value customers such as yourself. Are you—" Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "What's your angle, you silver-tongued trickster?" The voice faltered. Excuse me? You've called me seeking something, but your words be as slick as an oil spill in a tempest. What manner of trickery be this?" Sullivan could hear the hesitation, the way the caller scrambled for footing. "You wish to sell me something, he pressed. "Yet I have not come seeking your wares. That makes you the beggar here, does it not?" There was an audible gulp on the other end. I'll remove you from our call list." "Smart man." Sullivan hung up, satisfied. The phone rang again immediately. He huffed, expecting another poor soul attempting to wrangle coin from his pocket, but this time the voice on the other end was far more familiar. "Sullivan, my man," Clive's voice came through, smooth and brimming with energy. "Hope I didn't keep you waiting too long." Sullivan straightened. Clive, you be a welcome voice. Thought for a moment I'd have to battle another deceiver. I'm not gonna ask," Clive said with a chuckle. "Good news, though. I got a studio session set up for you today. Nothing crazy, just some preliminary recordings. Get you comfortable in the space. See how that golden voice of yours carries over the mic." Sullivan smirked. "A test of my mettle, then?" "Something like that," Clive agreed. "Think you can make it to Ocean Sound Studios by noon?" Sullivan glanced at the clock on Finn's wall. It was just after 10. Plenty of time. I'll be there." "Awesome. Address is—" Sullivan cut him off. "No need, lad. I'll find it." "You sure?" Sullivan grinned. "A man who can navigate by stars alone will not be felled by city streets." Clive laughed. "All right. See you soon." Sullivan hung up, grabbed his coat, and set out. The morning air carried the scent of salt and car exhaust, a strange blend of the familiar and the foreign. Miami pulsed with energy, vendors hawking food from small carts, tourists fumbling with maps, and locals striding with purpose, all moving to the frantic rhythm of the city. Sullivan had learned quickly that there was no such thing as a quiet moment here, only different levels of madness. He walked with confidence, boots clicking against the pavement, but truth be told, he was still getting his bearings. A month ago, these towering structures and endless metal carriages had made his head spin. Now he moved with something almost resembling ease. Almost. His first challenge of the day came at the bus stop. Sullivan had used these metal beasts before, but the process still vexed him. He watched as others tapped small plastic cards against a machine before boarding. When his turn came, he mimicked their actions, pressing Finn's bus card against the reader. A beep. Success. He stepped inside with a victorious nod, making his way to an empty seat. As he settled in, he noticed an elderly woman eyeing him from across the aisle. She was small, her face lined like a well-worn map, and she wore a heavy sweater despite the sweltering heat. "You new around here, son?" she asked, her voice gravelly. Sullivan smirked. "Aye, but I be learning fast." She nodded approvingly. "You speak funny. I like it." Sullivan chuckled. "And you be a sharp-eyed lady. I like you." She gave him a grin, then returned to her knitting, apparently satisfied. The bus rattled forward. Sullivan watched the city pass by through the window, its strange beauty unfolding before him. Towering glass buildings reflecting the sky, murals splashed across concrete walls, palm trees swaying lazily despite the rush of traffic below. It was a world far removed from the rolling waves and wooden decks of his past. But there was something about it. Something alive, untamed in its own way. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could carve out a place here. After a few stops and a short walk, Sullivan arrived at his destination, Ocean Sound Studios. The building was sleek, modern, and out of place among the chaotic energy of the surrounding streets. It loomed before him, a gateway into yet another uncharted realm. He exhaled slowly, adjusting his coat. A month ago, he had been a man stranded, lost in a world that made little sense. But now, he was about to step into something new, something that, against all odds, did make sense. A battle was a battle, whether fought with steel or song. With a confident nod, he pushed open the door and strode inside. The gathering storm of a party. Finn stood on the beach, hands on his hips, surveying his work with the keen eye of a master planner, or at least a man who had spent the better part of his afternoon making sure nothing was going to fall over in the breeze. The setup was complete. A long wooden table, draped in a deep blue cloth, bore trays of food he had painstakingly ordered from what he hoped were reputable establishments. A small stage stood off to the side, waiting for whatever impromptu performances might arise. String lights hung in gentle arcs between poles that he had, with great difficulty, convinced a group of teenagers to help him set up in exchange for a round of sodas and the vague promise that something interesting might happen tonight. In the distance, the ocean murmured softly against the shore, and beyond it, the city skyline gleamed like a constellation of glass and steel. Finn exhaled. Not bad. Then he turned to find Red poking suspiciously at the appetizers. "What exactly is this, Finn?" Red asked, holding up a small, delicately arranged tart between two fingers, as if it might bite him. Finn pinched the bridge of his nose. "It's food, Red." Red squinted. "You sure? Because I ain't trusting something I could fit 5 of in me fist." Finn opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off by the sound of approaching voices. Guests were arriving. Blackwood was the first to appear, walking with the distinct air of a man who had, for once, spent his morning learning for pleasure. He surveyed the setup, nodding approvingly. "Ah, splendid work, lad. A fine display." He picked up a glass, swirled the liquid within, and took a sip before adding, though I do question the lack of weaponry. Finn sighed. Not that kind of party. Every party's that kind of party if you try hard enough, Blackwood muttered, already helping himself to another drink. Sullivan arrived next, looking uncharacteristically pleased with himself. Clive was right behind him, wearing an easy grin as he clapped Sullivan on the back. "Man, your boy here?" Clive gestured at Sullivan, turning to Finn. "Absolute gold in the studio today. First time in a recording booth, and he's belting out sea shanties like he's trying to summon a storm." Finn smirked. "That is how he sings." Clive laughed. "Well, whatever it is, it works. We laid down 3 solid takes, and the sound engineers are losing their minds over it." He turned to Sullivan. "Told you, man. You've got something special." Sullivan, for his part, looked off toward the sea, as if contemplating the strange fate that had suddenly unfolded before him. "Never thought I'd see the day where men of the land would seek to bottle my voice like a fine rum." Clive snorted. "Yeah, well, get used to it." As the sun dipped lower, more familiar faces trickled in. Chapman, the director of Blood Glory, arrived in a crisp linen suit, looking exactly as one would expect a man of his profession to look. Sharp, confident, and already 2 glasses of wine into the evening. "Ah, my favorite accidental actor," Chapman declared, throwing an arm around Garrick the moment he spotted him. "And the rest of the Wayward crew, too. What a sight." He turned to Finn. "I hope you realize what a talented bunch you've got here." Finn raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I've got some idea." Chapman swirled his drink. "I mean it. Garrick here is one of the most natural performers I've ever worked with. And honestly," he gestured vaguely at the rest of them, "you all have presence. There's a weight to the way you move, the way you speak. It's rare, almost—" he snapped his fingers, searching for the word. "Otherworldly." Finn tensed ever so slightly. "Huh, fancy that." Finn smirked, but said nothing. The party was just reaching its peak when, "Hey, is there catering at this thing, or—" Every head turned as a familiar figure approached, pushing a hot dog cart. The vendor from the other day. Finn blinked. "Why?" Red crossed his arms. "Because I wasn't sure about your choices, Finn." There was a beat of silence. Then Sullivan nodded solemnly. "A wise precaution." Chapman, eyeing the cart, grinned. "You know what? I could go for a hot dog." Clive shrugged. "Same." The vendor, already pulling out buns, nodded approvingly. "Smart man." Finn sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine. Everybody get a damn hot dog. Let's just start the party." The after-party. The party on the beach had dwindled into a collection of small, scattered conversations, the remnants of laughter floating on the sea breeze. The once bright string lights now flickered in a lazy rhythm, and the catering table, despite Red's earlier doubts, was nearly picked clean. A few late stragglers lingered near the shore, finishing drinks and watching the waves roll in under the moonlight. Finn stood at the center of it all, hands in his pockets, surveying the scene. Chapman clapped Garrick on the shoulder, swaying slightly as he did. "You, my friend, have the makings of a true star," he declared, with the exaggerated confidence of a man several drinks deep. "And this whole lot, all of you, you've got something." Sullivan, who was now comfortably leaning against a barrel someone had dragged onto the beach, smirked. "We do tend to leave an impression." Clive checked his watch and stretched. "Hell of a night, Finn, but I think I'm going to call it." He turned to Sullivan. "We'll talk soon, yeah?" Sullivan nodded. "Aye, we'll see where the tides take this musical venture." As Clive and a few others said their goodbyes, Finn turned to the remaining crew, eyes gleaming. "All right, lads, the night's not over yet." Red, who was balancing the last bite of a hot dog between his fingers, frowned. "Seems pretty over to me." Finn scoffed. "Please, this was the warm-up. Now we go somewhere fun." Blackwood raised a brow. "You mean somewhere with more drinking?" "Yes," Finn said immediately. "And music, and questionable life choices." Garrick crossed his arms. "You had me at a drinking." Finn grinned, already walking backward toward the street. Then follow me, gentlemen. I know just the place. The streets were quieter now, the hum of the city settling into its late-night rhythm. The air was thick with the scent of fried food, distant exhaust, and salt from the sea. Streetlights cast long shadows as Finn led the crew down a side street, weaving through occasional pockets of life. Groups of revelers laughing outside of restaurants, a couple arguing over whether they had actually called a ride share or just thought about it, and a busker still half-heartedly strumming a guitar outside a closed cafe. As they rounded the corner, the sound of lively music spilled onto the sidewalk. The bar was wedged between two buildings, its old-fashioned wooden sign slightly tilted, as if it had been hung up by someone who had given up halfway through the job. The bouncer at the door, a mountain of a man with a thick moustache and arms like shipmasts, gave Finn a once-over before sighing. "You again?" Finn grinned. "Toby, you look fantastic tonight." Toby didn't smile. "You bringing trouble in with you this time?" Finn turned dramatically to the crew behind him, all of whom, at various levels of enthusiasm, stared back at Toby. "No trouble at all," Finn assured him. Toby exhaled and stepped aside. "Just don't break anything this time." Finn beamed, gesturing to the entrance like a showman revealing his grandest trick. "Gentlemen, shall we?" The bar was alive with energy, a smoky den of laughter, music, and poor decision-making. A live band played an energetic tune in the corner, their instruments barely keeping up with the tempo of the clapping and stomping crowd. The air carried the mingling scents of spiced rum, sweat, and a questionable amount of citrus. Finn led the crew straight to a large, battered wooden table near the back, triumphantly throwing his arms wide. "Gentlemen, tonight we drink to our victories." Sullivan eyed the table. "This place smells of regret." "So do you," Finn shot back. Sullivan shrugged. "Fair." Red dropped onto a bar stool with a satisfied sigh. "I like this place. Feels familiar." Blackwood scanned the room with an approving nod. "Aye, a proper drinking establishment. No odd glass contraptions serving swill with fruit in it." He spat the last word, like it personally offended him. A waitress appeared, balancing a tray of drinks as if it were an extension of her arm. She arched a brow at the group. "First round's on the idiot who keeps showing up here." She nodded at Finn. Finn clutched his chest. "Darla, you wound me." She set the drinks down with a practiced flick of her wrist. "Not yet, but give it an hour." As the drinks were passed around, Garrick raised his tankard. "To our first month in this bizarre land, may we continue to conquer it." The crew echoed the toast, tankards clinking. The first round went down smoothly, the second followed quickly after. By the third, things began to unravel in increasingly ridiculous ways. Somewhere between the fourth and fifth round, Red had taken it upon himself to teach a table of bikers how to arm wrestle properly, which resulted in a contest so intense that a small crowd gathered, placing bets and shouting encouragement. Meanwhile, Garrick and Blackwood had found themselves deep in conversation with an elderly fisherman at the bar who was weaving a tale so outrageous that even they found it difficult to believe. "And then," the old man slurred, "the damn thing just stood up, on two legs, right out of the water." Garrick squinted. "You expect me to believe a shark just decided to take a stroll?" "Aye," the man insisted, wagging a finger. "And it looked me dead in the eye, like it had a grudge." Blackwood took a slow sip of his drink. "What did you do to the shark?" "I don't know," the old man whispered, haunted. Across the room, Finn and Sullivan had gotten into a heated debate with a musician over the lost art of sea shanties, which had somehow escalated into a full-fledged singing duel. "Sing it again, old man," Finn challenged. The musician strummed his guitar dramatically. "Oh, I will, street performer." What followed was an increasingly ridiculous back and forth of escalating vocal performances, complete with dramatic gestures, crowd participation, and a bartender who, halfway through, decided to charge admission. By the time the final round was called, Finn was standing triumphantly on a table, arms outstretched like a victorious gladiator, while Sullivan looked one note away from throwing the musician through a window. The waitress reappeared, tossing a bar towel at Finn. "Get off the table before Toby throws you out the window." Finn hopped down, grinning at the crew. All right. I suppose we should gracefully take our leave." The walk home was filled with the kind of chaotic, joyous energy only found in the aftermath of a legendary night out. Red was loudly recounting his arm wrestling triumphs. Garrick was still debating whether or not land-walking sharks were possible, and Sullivan had taken to dramatically reenacting his best singing moments with increasingly exaggerated flourishes. Blackwood walked in satisfied silence, arms folded, nodding occasionally at the ridiculousness around him. Finn, content and a little tipsy, slung an arm around Garrick's shoulder as they approached the apartment. "See, you guys had fun." Sullivan huffed. It was tolerable. Finn smirked. "You sang a duet with a man named Johnny Mandolin." "Aye, well, a duel's a duel." They reached the apartment building, the night air still humming with distant music and city life. As they stepped inside, Finn clapped his hands together. "Gentlemen, I'd say that was a successful after-party." Sullivan yawned, stretching. "I'd say be time for some shut-eye before we all regret it in the morning." With that, the crew trudged inside, leaving behind a city that had, for one more night, been thoroughly conquered by a handful of wayward pirates.